So, welcome to today's deep dive. I have to ask, have you ever found yourself in one of those incredibly high-stakes meetings? You're staring at a senior executive through your webcam.
Oh, yeah, just sweating out.
Right. And you are just nodding along to this completely impossible deadline. You force a smile and you say, absolutely, we're on it.
Yep. And then the very second that video call ends, you immediately open a private Slack channel.
Exactly. You just start full on panicking with your team. We've all been in that exact seat. You want to look capable, right? You want to be this resilient team player, so you just say yes.
You do. But here is the brutal truth that we're exploring today. At the executive level, blindly saying yes to absolutely everything is not a sign of leadership.
Yeah, it's really not.
In fact, it is perceived as a critical weakness. It's actually the fastest way to signal that you are just not ready for the next level.
Which is wild, but true. And mastering that subtext, that is our mission today. We are exploring the high-stakes art of executive-level communication.
Specifically, we're looking at the linguistic nuances of managing upward.
Right. We've got some incredible source material today that breaks down how you survive and actually thrive in boardroom politics without, losing your credibility.
Because success at the senior level relies entirely on strategic judgment. What's fascinating here is that today is really about learning how to push back on unrealistic demands, but doing it in a way that actually increases your political capital.
And your executive presence, which, that feels like a total superpower, right?
Oh, definitely.
Because most of us are taught from our very first entry-level job that professionalism just means being agreeable. You deliver the work, you don't complain.
You put your head down and grind.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But before we get into the exact idioms and phrases you should use, we really have to unpack why incredibly smart, highly capable professionals actively sabotage themselves with the wrong language when they're under pressure.
Well, it all traces back to a fundamental misunderstanding of what executives actually value as you climb the ladder. Ambitious managers often overcommit because they mistakenly believe executive presence means always appearing infinitely resourced.
Like you have endless time and energy.
Right. They think saying, I can do it all no matter what, is how you prove your worth. And, to be fair, junior professionals are awarded for sheer effort and volume of output.
Yeah, the hustle.
Exactly. But senior professionals, they are rewarded for risk calibration. If you're a senior leader and you agree to a doomed project just to be polite, you aren't showing ambition. You are demonstrating a catastrophic lack of judgment.
Wow. Yeah, that makes so much sense. Let's ground this in a very real scenario from our sources.
Yeah.
So, imagine a global VP comes to you and asks your team to launch physical operations in 3 distinct countries within 6 weeks.
Right. A total nightmare.
A complete nightmare.
Yeah.
Now, objectively, anyone who knows the logistics of this business knows this is mathematically impossible.
Oh, sure. But in the room, nobody wants to be the one to kill the momentum.
Exactly. Nobody establishes a boundary, so everyone just nods. They walk out, the private panic sets in, and, 6 weeks later, the project publicly collapses.
As it was always going to.
Right. Okay, let's unpack this because it reminds me of a very specific trap. Overcommitting at work is exactly like maxing out a credit card just to look wealthy to your peers.
Oh, that is a perfect analogy. And just like financial debt, political debt accrues massive interest.
Right.
If you max out your team's capacity in Q1 just to please that VP and get that immediate validation,
You're totally broke later.
yes, you are operationally bankrupt by Q2 when the real business-critical priorities drop. Real executive maturity is identical to financial literacy.
Knowing what's in the bank.
Exactly. It's knowing your exact operational budget and confidently stating what you can and cannot afford without feeling, an ounce of embarrassment.
Which sounds great in theory, but let's be real. When you are actually in the room, the urge to just blurt out, "we can't do that," is so incredibly strong.
It's a natural reaction.
But our sources explicitly warn against that emotional reaction.
They do, and that is because of a concept called strategic friction reduction.
Strategic friction reduction.
Right. When you hear an impossible demand, your instinct is emotional resistance. You say, that timeline is unrealistic, or my team is already working nights and weekends.
Which might be 100% true.
It might be a fact. But we have to look at the neuroscience of the executive receiving that message. They are under immense pressure from boards, investors, the market. They're operating with a really high cognitive load.
So they aren't thinking about your weekend.
Exactly. When you say, I can't, you trigger their subconscious threat response. They don't process a capacity issue. They process you as a roadblock to their own survival.
You just become a source of friction in an already stressful day.
Exactly that. So strategic friction reduction is about framing your pushback so the executive's brain registers that you are protecting the business outcome, not just protecting your own time.
That is such a subtle but massive shift.
It bypasses their threat response completely and engages their problem-solving centers. So instead of saying, we don't have enough resources by Q3, you say, to deliver this successfully by Q3, we would likely need additional operational support or a narrower scope.
Right, you're introducing the exact same constraint.
Exactly, but you are framing it as a mutual strategy to protect a shared goal.
Which completely shifts the tone. And at this level, tone and vocabulary really are the dividing lines between someone who is just a competent operator and someone who is a truly influential leader.
Without a doubt.
I really want to spend some serious time here because I've been in these meetings where it feels like everyone is speaking in a completely foreign language.
Oh, the corporate jargon.
Yes. Okay, imagine a scenario where your director leans in and says, we need to socialize the idea of the merger because I'm sensing some strategic misalignment, so I need you to manage upward and push back on the timeline.
That is a dense sentence.
Right. To a junior employee, that might sound like just a minor scheduling hiccup wrapped in buzzwords. What are they actually saying to each other there?
That is a brilliant example because that single sentence is actually loaded with survival tactics. Let's decode it narratively.
Let's do it.
So when your director says socialize the idea, they aren't talking about taking a spreadsheet out for drinks.
Right, like an office party?
No, in the boardroom, socializing an idea means informally discussing a controversial concept with key stakeholders one-on-one before you ever put it on a PowerPoint in a formal meeting.
Oh, wow. Okay, so it's about testing the waters.
Exactly. Experienced executives know that surprises in a big meeting create instant public resistance. By socializing it, you avoid ambushing anyone, you gather quiet feedback, and you build alignment in the hallways.
So by the time you actually present, the decision has already been quietly made.
You've already won.
That is fascinating. The real meeting happens before the meeting even starts.
Precisely.
Okay, so what about strategic misalignment? Because it sounds so elegant and professional.
Do not let the elegance fool you.
Yeah.
In executive code, strategic misalignment is a massive, blaring red flag.
Really?
Oh, yeah. It is the polite way of saying, these two departments fundamentally disagree, they are going to war, and the internal politics are quietly becoming very dangerous.
Oh, wow.
It's a warning siren, but it is intentionally softened to keep the emotional temperature low.
Wow, okay. And then the director asked you to manage upward and push back. Now, managing upward is one I see misunderstood all the time. People hear it and think it means manipulating your boss.
Or endlessly flattering them to get what you want. Yeah.
Exactly. But our sources clarify this beautifully. Managing upward is actually about anticipating leadership concerns before they are ever voiced. It means simplifying complex decisions for them, and most importantly, becoming completely operationally trustworthy. You are creating this protective buffer around your executives so they are never blindsided.
Which naturally requires you to push back. And many professionals, especially those working in highly hierarchical international environments, they view pushing back as a career-ending move.
Right. They think it just means being uncooperative or difficult.
Exactly. But the reality is senior leaders actively rely on you to challenge their weak assumptions.
Because they can't see everything.
Right. If they trust you, they want you to stress test their ideas because they know they have blind spots. In those senior rooms, silence doesn't mean you're a great team player.
It means you aren't adding value.
Exactly. Silence actually reduces your credibility because it shows you aren't thinking critically.
I have to challenge this whole linguistic dance for a second, though, because, if strategic misalignment is just polite code for a disastrous warring plan, why not just say that?
That's the big question.
In many cultures, directness equals honesty and efficiency. If a plan is heading for a cliff, you say it's heading for a cliff. Isn't all this diplomatic ambiguity just corporate doublespeak that wastes everyone's time?
It is a very fair critique, and honestly, it's a massive hurdle in multinational organizations. But we really have to look at the cultural and psychological context of the boardroom.
Okay, lay it on me.
In Anglo-American executive culture, excessive directness sounds combative. Communication at that level is rarely just informational. It is highly relational.
So it's about feelings and status.
Yes. Ambiguity is intentionally used to preserve relationships, respect the hierarchy, and above all, maintain executive dignity.
Ah, executive dignity.
Saying there may be some operational considerations is the polite, ego-safe way of saying this plan is a total disaster. It allows the executive to pivot and change course without publicly admitting they had a terrible idea in the first place.
Okay, so if they are speaking in this elegant code specifically to save face, how do you actually step in and stop a disaster when your boss drops one directly on your desk?
Right, because you can't just yell no, and you obviously can't agree to it.
Exactly. What is the immediate tactical application when you are put on the spot?
Well, our sources highlight what they call the most powerful phrase in the executive toolkit, and it is this: help me understand the strategic priority.
Let me write that down. Help me understand the strategic priority.
Yes. And if we connect this to the bigger picture, the reason this phrase is a golden key is because the underlying mechanisms at play. First, it instantly buys you time.
You're not freezing, but you aren't committing either.
Exactly. Second, it shifts the entire conversation away from your emotional panic about resources and points it directly at business prioritization.
Which is their language.
Right. And third, it gently forces the executive to clarify their own trade-offs, which frankly, they probably haven't even thought through yet.
Let's test this. I really want to see how this actually feels, so I'll be the panicked CFO.
Okay, let's do it.
I'm going to storm into your office. I am highly stressed, and I say, we need to accelerate the global tech rollout by 6 weeks. The board is breathing down my neck. Make it happen.
Okay, so instead of panicking about my headcount or telling you it's mathematically impossible, I look right at you and calmly say, absolutely. Help me understand the strategic priority driving this acceleration so we can align our operational resources to match it.
Wow. Okay, breaking character for a second. As the CFO in that scenario, I am immediately disarmed.
It works, doesn't it?
It totally works. You validated me by saying, absolutely, you didn't say no, but you completely shifted the burden of explanation back onto my shoulders.
It is a complete psychological chess move.
Yeah.
Suddenly, the conversation isn't about my obedience or my team's capacity. It is about your strategy.
Right.
And when I invite you to articulate that priority, one of three things usually happens. One, you talk out loud and realize the request was actually just an impulsive thought, and you back down.
Which happens a lot.
A lot. Two, you realize you do need it fast, so you voluntarily agree to reduce the scope to make it happen. Or three, you reveal the hidden political pressure, like that board demand, which gives me the actual context I need to help you.
Either way, the room is completely de-escalated.
Exactly.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though, because that logic assumes the executive is acting rationally.
And they often aren't.
Right. Sometimes the resistance you face from leadership isn't about business strategy or timelines or budgets at all. It is entirely about ego and power dynamics.
And this is the unspoken reality of corporate life that trips up so many brilliant analytical minds. In highly hierarchical organizations, direct contradiction is politically dangerous.
Because it's seen as a threat.
Exactly. Every single piece of communication is constantly being assessed for status, for loyalty, and for perceived threat levels. If a leader feels their authority is being challenged in front of others, their amygdala takes over.
The lizard brain.
Right. They will double down on a terrible idea just to preserve their perceived power in the room.
Which means you have to learn to challenge the idea without ever challenging the person's authority. And the source material calls this ego-safe pushback.
A critical skill.
Instead of saying, I disagree with that approach, which immediately triggers their defense mechanisms, you pivot to something like, there may be an opportunity to de-risk the implementation slightly.
It sounds so much softer.
It really does. Or, if you are facing a truly bad idea, you use the technique of positive alignment before redirection. You say, we can certainly support increased visibility. To ensure reporting remains meaningful, I'd recommend we streamline the metrics.
Yes. You align with their desire first, validate it, and then you gently steer the ship away from the iceberg.
And part of steering that ship safely relies on what the sources call controlled transparency.
Right. Elite leaders absolutely surface risks early, but they do it in a way that engages the prefrontal cortex, the logical brain, rather than the emotional brain.
Because there's a massive neurological difference between executive escalation and just pure panic.
Huge difference. Saying, we're beginning to see some delivery risks that require resource rebalancing is strategic. It invites collaboration.
And saying, everything is falling apart, we're not going to make the deadline, is just panic.
It creates chaos.
Hmm.
Senior leaders are constantly watching how you handle pressure because pressure reveals your leadership maturity much faster than success ever does.
And a huge part of that maturity is what we could call executive trust. This is the unspoken rule of protecting leadership from avoidable public embarrassment.
Oh, this is so important.
If a CEO is in a crowded all-hands meeting and proposes a timeline that you know for a fact is pure fiction, you do not raise your hand and correct them in front of the entire company.
Never.
You do not win points for being the smartest person in the room if you humiliate the boss. You wait. You go to them privately later and say, I completely support the urgency you outlined today, but I wanted to flag an operational risk privately before our external expectations are set.
You save them from themselves, but you do it strictly behind closed doors.
Right, which preserves their authority, maintains your relationship, and protects the business outcome all at the exact same time. That is the true essence of executive diplomacy.
Absolutely beautifully said.
All right, I feel like this brings everything together nicely. The ultimate test of all these idioms, the ego management, the controlled transparency, it all culminates in the ability to effectively say no without actually ever uttering the word no.
Because at senior levels, a blunt no creates a psychological dead end.
Yeah.
You are literally shutting a door, which forces the executive to either accept defeat or bulldoze you.
And they usually choose bulldoze.
They almost always choose bulldoze. Instead, no is expressed through conditions, through trade-offs, and through sequencing. And our sources provide an incredibly actionable framework for you to use in these high-stakes moments. It is called the ARC framework. ARC.
Okay, let's break the mechanics of that down. So A stands for align, R stands for reframe, C stands for collaborate.
Exactly. First, align. You show immediate alignment with their goal to instantly reduce defensiveness. You say, I completely understand the urgency here. You validate their reality.
Makes sense.
Second, reframe. You shift the discussion toward priorities or constraints without sounding resistant. You say, the key consideration may be sequencing.
Shifting the focus.
Right. And finally, collaborate. You invite joint problem solving. Perhaps we could explore a phased rollout.
Okay, let's do a harder, multi-step role play to lock this in because executives do not always back down easily.
No, they don't.
So I am your company's COO. I come to you and I say, I need your division to absorb the entire Latin American rollout on top of your current Q3 workload. And by the way, we have no extra budget.
Okay, so using the ARC framework, I align, reframe, and collaborate. I say, I completely see why we need to move fast on Latin America. The key consideration for us is whether we prioritize speed for the new market or operational stability for our current Q3 deliverables. How would you like us to sequence those two priorities?
Okay, now, as the stubborn COO, I push back on your pushback. I say, I don't care about sequencing. I need both of them done simultaneously. It is mission critical.
Now I handle the secondary resistance by looping the framework, and I double down on the trade-off. I am fully on board with delivering both. To execute them simultaneously without compromising our data security, we'll need to pause the European expansion for 4 weeks to redirect those engineers. Should I draft that communication for the European team?
Ah, okay, I see the exact mechanism there. As the COO, you have trapped me in the reality of the math.
Exactly.
I can't just demand magic anymore. You force me to own the consequence of my demand by making me choose between Latin America and Europe. You push the burden of the trade-off straight back up the ladder.
And this raises an important question about your overall career trajectory. When you use a framework like ARC, you have to deeply internalize that the goal in these interactions is never to win an argument against an executive.
Right, it's not a fight.
If you view it as a battle of wills, you have already lost. The goal is to transform yourself, in their eyes, from an obedient, order-taking operator into a trusted strategic advisor.
The operator says yes until they physically break.
Exactly. But the advisor helps the executive safely see the consequences of their own requests.
So what does this all mean for you? Let's summarize the mission we set out on today. Executive presence is not about constant agreement. It is not about being a superhero who requires zero sleep.
Definitely not.
And diplomacy is definitely not weakness. It is about creating clarity without creating friction. By decoding and using calibrated idioms, by managing egos rather than fighting them, and by forcing those difficult trade-off discussions using the ARC framework, you are achieving two massive things.
Which are?
You are protecting your team from total burnout, and you are massively boosting your own credibility and influence in the organization.
It really is a complete paradigm shift in how you view communication. You stop being a victim of bad deadlines and start being an architect of business reality.
It is incredibly empowering. So here is my challenge to you. The very next time you are in a meeting and someone asks you to take on an unreasonable task or drops an impossible fictional deadline right in your lap, do not just nod and panic on Slack later.
Please don't.
Use the ARC framework. Align, reframe, collaborate, force the trade-off conversation, and just watch how the dynamic in the room instantly changes.
And as we wrap up, I want to leave you with one final thought to mull over or explore on your own.
Let's hear it.
We have spent this entire deep dive looking at how the highest echelon of corporate communication relies on removing your emotional reactivity, perfectly preserving the dignity of the other person, and enforcing your boundaries diplomatically through shared trade-offs.
Right.
If these precise techniques are powerful enough to safely navigate a demanding, high-ego CEO under immense market pressure, how completely could this exact same diplomatic pushback transform your personal relationships outside of the boardroom?
Wow. Imagine using the ARC framework on your family, aligning with your in-laws before reframing the holiday schedule. I mean, no more private panic channels in your own life.
Exactly.
But I think that is a deep dive for another day. Thanks for joining us.